Have a seat so we can start. Glad that each of you could be with us this morning as we begin our Sunday morning Bible class. For those of you who've been following along, we've been in the book of Luke, and I would say sort of going through the book, and many of you may have had this book or are looking through it. We're actually on chapter 4 today. Chapter 4 mainly covers the Sermon on the Mount. That covers Luke chapter 6 and also Matthew 5, 6, and 7. So that's where we'll begin this morning. So this morning I want to discuss what many believe is one of the most important passages or series of passages in the Bible, being the Sermon on the Mount. For thousands of years, Christians have considered the Sermon on the Mount the most important words in the entire Bible. We find the sermon in our study this morning in the book of Luke chapter 6, as I said, and even more detail in Matthew chapter 5 through 7. And a lot of the information I have from this study also comes from a book called Living Jesus by Randy Harris. This sermon is especially important because in the sermon, Jesus is talking directly to us, his followers, on how to live the Christian life. For the last 2,000 years, these words Jesus have spoken have been debated between scholars and church leaders on how they should be applied. Historically, Christian leaders have said a number of things about the Sermon on the Mount. One, they have said that the sermon only is applies to most dedicated church leaders and that can follow these things, but it's very difficult for the regular people like us to follow them. They've also said these teachings are too hard for anyone. The sermon only lays out goals we should strive for. Another person said these teachings are too hard but show us the need for God's grace. Keeping the laws literally is not the point. Others have said, yes, these teachings are hard, but by God's grace, we must try to keep them. Those of us who are older understand the one important primary way people learn and are transformed and come to know something is by doing. If we think back about when we had changes in our own life, it almost always revolves around taking some kind of action. We change who we are by going out of our comfort zone to do something new. Learning really is not what we know. We don't learn in order to do, but we do in order to know. You could even say we really don't know something until we experience it, until we do it. True knowledge comes from the experience. Both of my boys play hockey on a team in town, and they've done this and been involved in this since they were very young. They could have read all they wanted to about what it takes to become a good player, special techniques of shooting and passing the puck, but you can't read about how to balance on skates. So if you really want to know how to play the game, they have to get out there on the ice and practice. From a Christian standpoint, there are many things that we come to know that are true not by reading about them or discussing them, but we learn them when we go out and practice them. Jesus is well aware that knowledge and change comes from doing. So before we look at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount today, we want to hear what Jesus says at the end of the sermon about doing. Matthew 7:24. Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Jesus doesn't say that therefore that whoever hears these words of mine and believes them. He doesn't say who hears these and studies them, but whoever hears these words of mine and does them, puts them into practice, will be like the wise man who built his house upon the rock. We are transformed into people like Christ when we begin to do and practice the things Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount. So this morning we're going to go back and look at a few passages from the sermon and see as Christians what we need to be practicing. Matthew 5, 1 through 12. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Jesus begins the Sermon on the Mount with blessings, and he blesses the people who are most desperate for them: the poor, the humble, the persecuted, and those who mourn. In Luke's passage it says that people were following him from all over Judea and came to hear him and be healed of their diseases. Those who had evil spirits were cured, and people tried just touching him were being healed. Jesus starts out speaking to the people not with commands, but with the words, "Blessed are." In almost all of Jesus' miracles of healing, he heals to put that person back into society. The word for poor in the spirit means those that are pitiful, pathetic, the worthless, the outcast. We all like to think of ourselves as winners, but many people experience what it's like to be poor in spirit. Not selected for the job, not picked for the team, didn't make the dean's list, received a poor grade on the test when others did so well. We all have times when we feel poor in spirit, rejected, when things seem hopeless, and we are all alone. Some have tried to help us understand what blessed means by calling or using the word happy. But happy doesn't really fit. Who can be happy about mourning? I prefer how the Bible scholar prefers the word privileged, as in privileged before God. Privileged are those that mourn. You are privileged, you have a place before God. In the American culture, we are told to strive to be winners, to be at top, to get the good life. No, the good life, the blessed life, the privileged life is a life where God loves you and you are blessed as children. Love your enemies. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you and pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, and turn to him the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from him. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. We've read this verse many times, but have you really looked at it? What would we say to someone who says, if someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to the other as well? Who is it that says, if someone takes your clothes, give him your shirt too? Our natural response would be, are you out of your mind? That's probably what we would say. Is this really going to work? The bad people I know, if I gave them one thing, they would want everything. In this example, it says Jesus is offering a better way. Instead of challenging, being angry, or responding with violence, Jesus says, try a better way. Besides, the way we've been doing it hasn't been working very well. So Jesus is saying, when someone hurts you, don't try to get even. Put away vengeance and violence. Jesus said that everybody loves his friends and hates his enemies. What sets Christians apart is that we try to love people who are not our friends and people who treat us badly. Jesus offers us another way, a better way. When someone does something against us and we don't retaliate, that is a step toward loving our enemies instead of warring against them. Do to others as you would have them do to you. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hid, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. You are salt. You are light. Early in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about Christians being salt and light. But what does it mean to be salt? What does it mean to be light? What is Jesus talking about? He's talking about how Christians should be and how we should live in this world. Both salt and light are in this example. They are different, and when each is applied, dramatically changes their surroundings. What happens when you put salt on bland food? It makes it taste better. It's a sharp contrast to how it tasted before. When a room is dark, you have trouble seeing. Light that shines in the dark room totally changes your view and perspective. Like salt and light, Christians should stand out to the point that people should see us as different, a contrast to the world, illumination, a difference. When people see our life, they should want to ask, you are different. What makes you different? Do people say that about you? Do people ask about you? Sometimes we just want to blend in with the crowd. We don't want to be odd or different. Especially for our kids, it's really not cool. It's terrible for them to be odd and different with their friends. Our kids need to know it's cool to be a Christian. It's cool to be kind, to stand up for weaker people, to stay away from the trappings of the world. Jesus asks us to be different in a way that makes people notice. Has Christianity just become another group, like Republican or Democrat? What should we look like if we lived out this passage? The world needs salt and light. We don't need to be a bunch of Christians that look like the world. We need to be people that live the way Jesus lived, and in doing so, bring light to the world. Matthew 5:21 through 26. You have heard that it was said to people long ago, you shall not murder, and everyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answered to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. You're stupid. You're a moron. You're an idiot. How often have these words come out of our mouth? In Jesus' day, it was raka, or you fool, a curse word, was a way to put people down and make fun of them. In this passage, Jesus talks about murder. We would think murder, that's just crazy. I would never do that. But Jesus says that's where murder begins, is by making fun, disrespect, hating. For some reason in our society, we admire those who throw out the best insult. Trash talking is constant these days. We see that every day. We may feel pretty good when Jesus says, you should not murder. But when he goes on to say that anyone who is angry with his brother is subject to judgment, now I'm not doing so well. Jesus says, if you're on your way to worship and you remember that your brother has something against you, go be reconciled to your brother before you come to church. Mending fences, having a good relationship with your brothers and sisters, according to Jesus, is way more important than coming to worship. Have you ever come to worship having issues with brothers or sisters you are worshiping with? What would the world be like? And our congregation be like if everyone laid down their anger and became peacemakers? Matthew 5:27 through 32. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that everyone who looks on a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. In the beginning of the Bible, God said he made man and woman, and it was good. The relationship between a husband and his wife is ordained by God. Our culture not only has it wrong with this relationship, but has it wrong badly. Our culture promotes following through on your every desire, and that controlling your desire is weak and stupid. This culture promotes using people for your own purpose. Like so many things in our life, it's easy for us to begin to follow worldly thinking and temptation. Jesus calls us to a different world view in which people are to be loved and not used, and where faithfulness, especially to our spouse, is a deep characteristic of being Christ-like. So when losing our commitment in your relationship to your spouse leads to emotional hurt and pain and loss and trust, God made this relationship between husband and wife to be eternal. Again, from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:33 through 37. Again, you have heard it was said to people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. I've never been in court. I've gone to the jury duty a few times, and so I've seen the judge say, what? You know. Raise your right hand and ask, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? So we really don't do a lot of that kind of swearing these days. But there's other forms of truthfulness. Studies have shown that virtually every student as they go through school at some time will cheat on a test. In fact, cheating on tests in high school and college is supposedly at an all-time high. When we ask, most students confess that sometimes they have cheated. But we shouldn't just blame students. Lying, cheating, stealing has become a national pastime. Just look at the news every day. Lies or accusations of lying on every page of the newspaper. Lying is the main subject of news broadcasts. So anymore, it's very hard to figure out where the truth lies. Lying, cheating on your tax return. I'm sure none of us have done that. Even though each of us does this from time to time, we still think of ourselves as people of integrity. Jesus emphasizes that we need to be people of high integrity. In all occasions, we should be telling the truth, the whole truth. There is no reason to swear, to promise your words. Your yes should be yes, and your no, no. Matthew 6, 1 through 8. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that you may give in secret. When your Father who sees in secret, so what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask them. Look at me, watch me. We often would hear our kids say, showing off. Even as they get older, they want to know that mom and dad are watching. At the band concert, at the track meet, at the hockey game. Even as we get older, we want people to notice us. When my wife and her friends run the long race, they almost always, as fast as possible, get back home to look at the website to see their names and times on the board. We like to be noticed. But in this sermon, Jesus goes on just being noticed to the motivation behind your purpose. Praying before the church, teaching class, or helping the poor are all important services to God. But if we do those things to impress others, God says, you've received your reward. God looks to the heart and wants to know what you do all these things because you love and you're devoted to him. Jesus says, do not practice righteousness to be seen. Our utmost thought should be that we want to do good works to be seen by God. Again, from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6, 19 through 24. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For there your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? For many of us, this may be one of the most difficult passages in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Most of us work hard every day so we can have a good life for ourselves and provide a good life for our children. We want things. Our kids want things. I remember very well as I grew up, and I'm reminded now from my boys, so many wants. 4-wheelers because so-and-so has them, a hot tub, a Wii, a trip to Hawaii, and more. The wants at times seemed endless. Many times it's hard for us to talk about money, and it's easy for us to point to others and condemn their lifestyles or expenditures. God says it all has to do with your eyes. He says if your eyes are good, your whole body is full of light. And if your eyes are bad, your whole body is full of darkness. Of all the 10 commandments, have you ever thought which one doesn't really fit? There are commandments that deal with how we treat others and how we treat God. Perhaps one of the most unlike the other is this one: thou shalt not covet. Because coveting is an attitude. James, the book of James, talks about this and says this: what causes fights and quarrelings among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your own pleasures. When our eyes continually want things, your body is full of darkness. Our whole economic industry is no help here because it is their sole purpose to convince you that you need what they're selling. People seem to have the latest and the best, and if you don't, someone else does, and then you begin to covet. How do we have good eyes? Jesus answered that with a little test. Wherever your heart is, there is where your treasure is. Oops, I said that wrong. Jesus said, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be as well. Where is it that you spend your time, your money, your effort? That's where your heart is. That's where your treasure is. But towards the end of the chapter, he provides the key. He says, what I want you Christians to do is when it comes to material stuff, is to stop worrying. Wow, that's easy to say, stop worrying. But that's hard for all of us to do. God says, I take care of the birds. I take care of the grass. I will take care of you. Stop worrying. Our next passage from Matthew 7, 1 through 14. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. I think most of us believe that Jesus was a very serious person, and most of the time I believe he was. But you have to really like this passage, because Jesus is actually funny. Can you imagine somebody walking around with a beam in their eye? And even funnier is this person with a beam in their eye, and as they say to someone else, let me take that speck of sawdust out of your eye so you can see better. But the issue is that this story illustrates is how judgmental we are with one another. Most of the time we are judgmental to others because we feel superior, because on certain subject I have my act together more than you, so I can feel superior than you are and judge you. Jesus is not saying in the Sermon on the Mount that we should not judge, but that we should so often be too quick to judge others unfairly, especially when we have problems with our own to deal with. Have you ever been watching VeggieTales with your kids? Some of you may not know this movie, but many of us has watched this probably 100 times. In the movie, there's a scene when Jonah is inside the whale, and a chorus of singing and praising God comes up. God is a God of second chances. They're singing. So many times we hear someone say something, and we tend to take it in the worst possible way. What would it be like if we focus our own problems and how we can improve to give other people the benefit of the doubt? And like God, we see something that they've done wrong, give them a second chance before we judge them. In closing this morning, the single most important question about the Sermon on the Mount is whether or not Jesus actually expects us to do these things or not. Because others, Martin Luther and some others, have tried to lead us to believe that Jesus is trying to do is set a standard that is so impossibly high that we realize what terrible sinners we are and throw ourselves on the grace of God. But that is not what the Sermon on the Mount is about. If Jesus is to be believed, because his conclusion is this: anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man. How do we as Christians live the sermon? In our Bible classes, we've read the sermon many times, spent hours, years talking about the sermon. We've studied it, what it means to be blessed. Who are the meek? Who are they that mourn? So we all have this information. But when it comes to the sermon, for the most part, we've never practiced it. And until you practice it, it's just theory. My boys would never have to learn how to skate, shoot, and pass playing hockey by reading a book. They had to get out and practice it. And if we don't get out and practice, we really don't know what happens when we do these things. We as Christians have a theory that we should love our enemies, to have our yes be yes and our no, no. But for the most part, we've never tried it. And we don't know what happens when we do it. I know a Christian professor who mentors young men, and young men around the high school and college age. I don't know if you know that much about our high school and youth age kids. Well, they're not that into studying the Bible. They're very distracted with school. They're distracted with activities. They're distracted with iPhones. They are so much more into discussing what they feel is practical or something they can apply. So what he has started to do is each week with his group is they study one aspect of the Sermon on the Mount. And they spend that week practicing it. Isn't that what Jesus said? He who practices is like the wise man. So these young men go out in their everyday life during the week, spend time practice, loving their enemies. They will spend a week practice developing integrity. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. They will spend the week trying to be salt and light to those around them. These insights and experiences living the Sermon on the Mount is changing their lives and increasing their faith for the better. What if we all practiced in that way? What if we said to these young people in our youth group, come walk with us as we practice these things together? Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. Let's pray as we close this morning. Our most gracious God and Father, we're so thankful for this day where we all can be together to learn what Jesus has said on the Sermon on the Mount. How we need to be practicing these words that he has said to become better Christians and better followers of you. We'd ask you to be with us as we continue our worship today. Be with our young people as they study in their classes. Help them to come to know you and to obey you. Bless us as we continue our worship this morning. All these things we ask in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you for your attention.